In 1514, the goldsmith Urs Graf sketched a young Trossfrau. Her hair was long, uncovered, and braided to show her youth, and she wears a dress that is plain, typical of those of the lower classes. She's got her hands raised, seemingly in greeting, but carries a more somber expression. Graf's sketches of the Trossfrau are ultimately through the gaze of a Renaissance man's values, a mixture of both his desire for them and his condemnation. But it was this sketch that won me over into doing the Trossfrau, after my friends had spent so long trying to convince me to do German Renaissance. Urs Graf is Swiss, however, and as a Holy Roman Empire's Langsnecht company, we jokingly hate two groups of people, the French and the Swiss. So I couldn't just recreate her and call it a day. I could, however, recreate her in spirit. Many of the women who took up sex work took it up out of necessity. It was considered something that had to be done in medieval society, and even in the writings of saints like St. Augustine, for the protection of respectable women from unmarried men. But the women engaged in such work, which once again was considered necessary, were looked down upon for this so-called dishonorable work. The structure of urban brothels ensured that women who worked in the industry would remain in that business, notably in late medieval Austrian sites where only about a third of a woman's earnings actually went to her. She stayed in the Frauenhaus out of intense economic pressures and debts. As I constructed my impression of Walpurg Mon, I kept all of that in mind, and sought to portray her as more than her current dangerous profession as well. Walpurg was born in Lübeck, a city whose main power came from its place in the Hanseatic League. However, in places where there is great wealth, there is often great poverty. Her family was among that impoverished population, though I've yet to go so far in depth in the economics to specify the work they did to get food on the table. In the shadow of the flourishing trade, patched clothes and faded dyes would have made up much of Walpurg's clothing, and she likely looked up at the beautiful artworks of St. Mary's Church, with the gilded Tabernacle of Klaus Grube, the altarpiece of Christian Swarte, and so many more works of art with awe. It's these pieces of work that ended up inspiring this gown, specifically the work of Klaus Berg, a Lübeck-born sculptor, in his Sandrum Kirk altarpiece. The cut of the gown is typical of most German gowns, high in the waist and full-skirted, but the gowns on the altarpieces are far more about the drape of the cloth than slashing or embroidery. That was important, since this fabric would have been especially dear to Walpurg. It's not some homespun, home-woven fabric, nor is it woolen. This is a worsted cloth of a 2-2 twill, with a magnificent finish. The blue is also fairly dark, suggesting that this would have been through a couple of baths of woad in order to achieve its color. To account for this expense, I made extremely careful choices whilst cutting, and ended up only using 3.5 yards of this cloth. While if I were to cartridge pleat it, the gown would take something more like 5 yards. Why this plain middle-class gown, though? The answer comes down to the fact that a woman wouldn't just leave everything behind when she picked up to join the tross of a company. Yes, she'd often have little, because they're driven to join out of poverty, but something of high-quality cloth like this wouldn't just be abandoned. It's plain, especially in comparison to the garments worn by the men of the company. Many of you have, for example, seen the Waffenrock I made for Götz, and Wolfram von Augsburg has a rock that has something close to 4.5 yards in the skirt alone. Ironically, it was after completing the gown that I realized I had followed the advice of Christine de Pizan, who claimed that true repentance, including the wearing of decent clothes and attending church, would bring God's protection from a prostitute's male aggressors. As time goes on, I will add in more quintessential Trossfrau clothing, but this is a gown picked to represent where Walpurg came from its practical cut to its plain ornamentation. Even the guards, though of an expensive black, are from scraps. These ones came from a project that was made about 2.5 years ago, when Diomendes came over to work on his right rock with me. All of his scraps ended up in my stash, and they finally got used today. Much like Walpurg, I worked on this at my parents' home, and so the final feline interruptions aren't from Pounce, but instead from Prince, who is a TNR cat who ended up adopting us. He was utterly fascinated by the string in a way that Pounce isn't anymore, since she's figured out that sewing isn't the best time for pets. I think it's important when making an impression to not only think of who they are in the now of your recreation, but also in the past. It may be the part of me that's a friend of authors, but as I've grown in crafting my impressions, I've begun to spend far more time looking into their pasts, rather than just deciding what do I need to make it evident who they are now. From there, we can not only better understand the people we present to the public, but also develop our own understanding of the context of the people that we are creating impressions of. And I think that's important for a holistic approach to living history. Yes, I'm in the SCA. I don't necessarily have to go through the effort, but that's what is the reason I study history, to better understand people and our pasts. I'm ridiculously happy with this gown. I really couldn't have asked for anything better. Thank you so much for watching, and I ask that you check out the Fight for the Homeless that is being run by the Anvil and Goatworn Armband, as well as a live stream next week where I will be reading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight for my birthday. Alright, I will see you next time.